Good afternoon, everybody. What a great crowd. You made a good start on the hors d'oeuvres, too. I'm very proud of you. I'm Lee Huntsman, and it's my privilege to moderate this conversation this afternoon. But first of all, it's my privilege to welcome you all. Thank you for coming to Under the Boughs. Kind of a weird name, eh? That's because of the tree symbol, right, of the Cambia Grove. And the spirit of this, David, can you get rid of that music we're hearing? Thank you. The notion is to take a little time and maybe go a little deeper, have a little quieter conversation about topics related in some way to innovation in healthcare. The premise behind all of this is that we're here to help make healthcare better, but boy, it's complicated and risky. And it's because healthcare is changing before our eyes in ways that are both simultaneously unclear and anxiety producing. Any of you witness any of the anxiety factors out there in modern healthcare? Anyway, so the notion of talking together, networking together is central to helping us keep our eyes on the opportunity to really make constructive innovations that meet real needs in healthcare. And that's what this series is about. I do want to take a moment to recognize that this series, Under the Boughs, is sponsored jointly by Cambia Grove, our hosts here today. Thank you, Nicole. And by the BioEngage program, which is an outreach program at the University of Washington put on by the Department of Bioengineering there. And their goal is to help people understand what's going on in the biomedical and biotechnology space at the UW and all of its various manifestations. So if you have needs like that, check out BioEngage and see how they might be able to help you, either to meet people or connect with researchers. So our topic today is artificial intelligence in healthcare. Simple topic. And we're very honored to have with us today both Scott Parris, the CEO and co-founder of Synapse Medical Intelligence, and Robbie Cape. He's the CEO and a co-founder of 98.6. And I've acknowledged to these gentlemen that what we're going to try to do is get some of their perspective on what artificial intelligence in healthcare is or might become, acknowledging from the beginning that it's a very big topic. So we're not going to try and cover it all today. But you are invited to create as sharper questions as you can, because we're going to have a Q&A session. But first, it's my turn. Gentlemen, thanks. First, tell us a little bit about how did you get into this swamp called AI? What's your professional trajectory, and what's the nature of the enterprise that you're on right now? Scott, you want to start?
Sure. I'll bookend this a little bit because this has to do with the mind, and so I've got an unusual starting point. Which is, as an undergraduate, I did an independent thesis program living in Nepal for 2 years, spent most of that time in Tibetan Buddhist monasteries. And the short of that, that's all about the mind. How does the mind work? They have a kind of well-developed set of thoughts about that. From there, I came back, ended up in business school, and we're now talking kind of early mid-'80s, where technology and strategy were kind of really interesting intersections for me. That led me into helping co-found one of the, I think it was actually the first network of CEOs for high technology companies. And the collaboration and the value I saw out of that was just really remarkable. That led me into a career basically hopscotching across a whole set of different early stage technology companies and across some different industries that included everything from databases to automating, in essence, the McKinsey approach to presentations, a McKinsey version of PowerPoint, as it were. Also automating the thought process that McKinsey uses, both training and then an applications tool. I did a couple of stints in the music industry, one actually applying artificial intelligence to music, to sound processing, and the other, for those music fans way deep back there and who are of a certain age, I was actually CEO of a company called Internet Underground Music Archive, which was literally the first company to put music on the internet. So the short of this is I've seen a lot of changes over time. The reason I'm so excited to be at Synapse is that it's this confluence of thinking about the mind, how it works, thinking more deeply about collaboration, how that works, thinking about how technology intersects that, and underlying all of that, a deep sense of purpose. Because, as Lee was saying, they're huge challenges, it's very complex, but what a difference it can make to actually transform and change the trajectory of healthcare. And I'm a firm believer, we'll be talking about it tonight, that AI can really do it. And are there challenges? Absolutely, but it's that purpose part of it which is truly exciting.
Thanks. Robbie?
Can everyone hear me okay? Is that all right? I don't think this is on.
That should go up. That should do it. Yeah.
Okay, now can everyone hear me okay? Yeah, I'm going to hold it down here because my voice is kind of loud. So I don't have as interesting a background. I've only worked at 3 companies for my whole career. I actually started my career in technology. I was an intern at Microsoft between my junior and senior year in college. And I'm originally from Montreal, and I fell in love with Microsoft and fell in love with the Pacific Northwest. And after the internship, Microsoft offered me a full-time position, and I joined on full-time, literally drove out a month after graduation and joined Microsoft in 1993. I come from a family of entrepreneurs. So literally, as far as the eye can see, everyone who worked in my family, as far as the eye can see, they were an entrepreneur. My uncle actually founded one of the first biotech companies in the United States. He was a patriarch of biotech. And so that's kind of where I come from. And I expected, I would do 3 years at Microsoft and learn how to build software from the best. That was back in the 90s. Microsoft was by far the best. And then I'd go start my own business, because that's what I've been put on this earth to do. Well, it turns out that my 3-year plan didn't work out so well. My 3-year plan turned into 12 years at Microsoft. And finally, in 2005, I decided that I needed to go do what I wanted to be doing for the rest of my life, which was building businesses. This is the first piece of advice that I'm offering to anyone here who wants to hear my advice, is try very hard to do today what you want to be doing for the rest of your life. I am doing today what I want to be doing for the rest of my life, literally. So I left Microsoft and founded a little calendar company called Cozy, and built that up. It was easily 100 times harder than I thought it was going to be. I'm covered with scar tissue from the experience. Happy, it's a separate topic. Happy to tell you all about that. And built it for 9 years, and eventually we sold it to Time Warner, and then we spun out of Time Warner with Time Inc., and I stayed at Cozy for another year after that. But during that year, I started to meet with friends and people I knew, and was really starting to think about what I wanted to do next. And there were 3 areas I was particularly interested in. I've always been interested in healthcare. It was when I was very young, I wanted to be a doctor. I wanted to be a surgeon until I was 13, and I got a computer for my bar mitzvah, and then I got into computers. So healthcare was always there. Plus, I'm Canadian, so I'm from Quebec, and I'm used to a very different way of healthcare. And so the healthcare system in the United States has always perplexed me. It's been confusing to me. Like, you need healthcare, you go, you get it. Like, the government pays. Really? What? I have to hand over a credit card for healthcare? That's crazy. So healthcare has always been interesting. I also had some interest in renewable energy, and my family's in the cosmetics business, another separate topic, so I had a cockamamie idea in the cosmetic space. And I ended up meeting, I also happen to believe that you form companies first with people and not with ideas. So my focus in figuring out what I want to do next was really identifying the people who I wanted to do it with. And so I actually met with this one guy who I had identified as a guy who I'd love to start a business with. And we sat down and he said, oh, what are you interested in? I said, well, I'm interested in healthcare, renewable energy, and cosmetics. And he said, okay, that's interesting. And I said, oh, and I'd like to start a business with you. He's like, what? And he goes, well, I'm really excited about healthcare too, and I've been talking to some other guys about it, and let's all start brainstorming. And so we did. And that's what landed us on 98.6. I mean, it was just that natural and organic. Now, interestingly, I often get, we're deeply embedded in recruiting right now. We're building the team as fast as we possibly can, so I tend to spend a lot of time with potential recruits. That's a plug, by the way, across all areas of our business. Often people sit down, they'll say, Robbie, it's kind of weird, you did money at Microsoft. Money was the core of my experience at Microsoft. That was our personal finance management software package. And then you did Cozy, that was like calendaring stuff. And now you're doing healthcare. How did you get into healthcare? And what I tell them is exactly how I feel, which is there's actually much more in common between these things than would meet the eye, okay? When I was running the money business at Microsoft, we were all about helping families manage their personal finances and manage their financial plan. And as some of you probably know, financial issues are one of the top causes of divorce in families. Okay, so we were helping families in a very real way, and that's why I love that job. At Cozy, we were managing the logistics of family life. And it turns out that there is a lot, for those of you who have families, there is an enormous amount of disconnect and friction in families related to logistics. And so actually our mission at Cozy was for the families who use Cozy to have better relationships with each other. So we're trying to improve people's lives. And that's exactly what we're trying to do at 90.6. Ultimately, we want families, individuals, to be healthier at a more reasonable cost. In fact, we believe that basic primary care should be available to every single person on this earth, and that it can be delivered at a tiny, tiny fraction of the cost that the current delivery mechanisms have established. And so it's all actually very related, and that's the short answer. Now, I do want to do one other plug, if that's okay.
That's all right.
So we're actually reaching a pretty major milestone. We're in, some of you might go to our website, 98.6.com. We're still very much in stealth mode. We're not really talking specifically about what we're doing, but one way that you can actually find out a little bit about what we're doing is by joining a clinical study that we are launching on Tuesday, right, Sam? Where we will actually begin treating patients. Our material can't say it, but I'll say it to you. It's healthcare for free. There's a bunch of incentives when you join a study, and we're trying to get thousands of people in this study to help us, build out the product, and it's incredibly exciting. So it's an upcoming milestone, and it's pretty phenomenal that we've achieved it, and I'm super excited about it.
Oh, I can see why. Wow. Okay. Primary care disrupted. It's hard from the outside to figure out just how it's going to work. So that's temptation enough to sign up right there.
Yeah, you can go to our website. There's a research study tab at the top and something like that. And you can sign up, and then we'll contact you when we're ready to get you signed up.
Okay, great. Well, speaking of the top, let's start at the top with AI. Because, I mean, we know all the buzzwords, right? There's big data, right? And there's analytics, expert systems, knowledge engines. I always like that because I like engines. Of course, there's Watson, right? There's all these buzzwords out there. What is AI? I mean, how do we think about it? How do we get our minds around it? Quite apart from healthcare, just the term has been around for a long time, but I think the vast majority of us couldn't give a simple definition. So, what is AI? How would you encourage us to think about it, Scott?
Let me go back to the beginning, and with a quick preface, which is I'll kind of share my theory and take on this. Mm-hmm. What AI has been debated for decades, going back to the very beginning, as has intelligence, the meaning of the word intelligence, even applied to humans. So this is a broad area with a lot of different viewpoints. Artificial intelligence, the term was coined by John McCarthy in 1956, actually as a marketing effort to help get funding for the very first AI conference, as it were. About a dozen folks, I mean, absolute luminaries, people whose, if you were in the computer science industry, you would recognize in a moment, got together to start contemplating, is there this possible thing that can be done using machines, using computers, that might be turned into something that looks like intelligence. They might behave like what we think something smart behaves like. And out of that, I'm deeply truncating and simplifying some of this, but came two general threads, at least at that time. And one was for inductive inference, and there were a set of folks who were keenly interested in that. And there was another group that were interested in basically if-then logic and fact-based evolution. And again, granting me a little bit of literary license here, that then has morphed into all these terms, Lee, that you were mentioning, and that embody, in the case of Watson, at least I've heard, something like 30 different technologies, actually. For marketing purposes, they put this nice name on it, and they've got these great graphics and so forth. But if you peel back under the hood, what you see are a lot of different technologies, and one of their challenges is, in fact, how to weave those together. The other thing I would comment on is that the notion of our minds, our intelligence, and that relationship to computers goes way back to the beginning. So John von Neumann, who created the fundamental architecture for computers in this age, are generally called von Neumann machines. I mean, that's what we use. That's what computers are. He was fascinated by the similarities and the questioning about similarities between the mind and how computers work. And in fact, at the end of his life, he was working on a manuscript which he never completed. He was literally working on it on his deathbed in the hospital about the similarities between the mind and the computer. So there's this deep-seated, kind of from the origins of computing, set of questions about how's the mind relating to intelligence. And then, of course, Alan Turing created the Turing Test, basically a test to determine, are you interacting with a computer or are you interacting with a human? And if you can fool the human into thinking you're interacting with another human, you've passed the Turing Test, basically an equivalence of intelligence. So those are just a couple of framing things, I think, going back to the beginning about kind of where this came from. But then you can kind of see this expansion and these multiple threads coming out, everything from robotics, natural language processing, machine learning, automated reasoning, the realm we live in, the Synapse, my company lives in that realm. And one of the most interesting things, which I think will come out in the conversation tonight, is how these are going to, I think, interweave, interestingly, over time, and how they're going to interweave with humans. Because we think this is very much going to be a collaborative co-evolution that takes place. And it's very hard to see how that will unfold, but it's very exciting.
Exactly what Scott said is first of all, his historical description is phenomenal, and my answer was going to be, there's nothing new here. There really is nothing new here. There's a bunch of marketers who have created a bunch of buzzwords related to what computers have been doing forever. And it really is just that simple. And I'm going to take you back a little bit, actually, to my I still feel like I'm pretty young, but back in college, so I was an operations research major at Princeton. And I wrote my thesis on transportation algorithms, so it was particularly focused on the transportation industry. And it turns out that everything that we were doing was, I mean, today they would call it AI. I mean, a computer that is able to basically process large amounts of data in order to propose or make a decision on a given difficult topic. I mean, that's what computers do. Today they call that AI, but computers have been doing that forever. And in fact, the really interesting thing to me is that the underlying models that we are still using today to do all this magical AI work are the same models that my professors were writing papers about in the early 1980s. They're the same models that I learned in the early 1990s. You know, there was deterministic modeling, which was when you were modeling in a case where you knew everything to be the case. So for example, North American van lines. I mean, do we call this AI? You know, they used to have teams of people every night who would sit in a room and they'd look at all the loads that they had to move across the country. And it took them hours and hours and hours. And eventually, I mean, these people learned how to do it. They had models in their head around how they figured out how to route the trucks with the loads across the country in the most efficient way for North American van lines. Well, a bunch of professors at MIT and a bunch of professors at Princeton and a bunch of professors at a bunch of other universities started to develop deterministic models that enabled them to begin solving these problems with network solutions. I mean, that was AI. You know, you feed in the data and you make a recommendation, and now you need far less people. Plus, you can make these decisions that would take 10 people 5 hours to make. You could make these decisions in fractions of a second, written in Fortran. I mean, that's what they did. Well, okay, now let's turn it forward a little bit. I'm not forward like time. Now, stochastic modeling. Stochastic modeling has been around for a long, long time. You know, you talk about Q theory. Q theory is based on stochastic modeling. This is modeling where the inputs or the potential outcomes that you're looking at, that you're needing to optimize, are not deterministic. They have probabilities associated with them. And it's where we're going to start looking, and you know, this stochastic models fit very well in healthcare, right? Because nothing is a certainty, everything is just probabilities. Well, all the models, all the modeling capabilities, the solution algorithms that were established to solve those complex models were all built back then, and they're still being used now. They really are still being used now. If you really go look at the core of all the models that we all use, you know, we don't build the underlying models that do our AI, and there's no startup that does that. All the models are out there. You get data scientists who look at massaging the data that gets input into the model, and you find creative ways to feed new data back into the model based on you know, what you're actually seeing in the market. But at the end of the day, the methods are the same. The underlying capabilities, which is that you're using computers to solve very, very large scale and complex business, healthcare, logistics, automation, finance. I mean, every field has it. And so, you know, I look at AI, I think it means, it's a buzzword, it means a lot of things to different people. And the bottom line is, it's the same thing that we've all been, those of us in technology, have been looking at for years across many different areas.
Okay, so the picture I'm getting is that AI could be considered a kind of an umbrella term, and there are many models, tools, technologies. Scott, you mentioned Watson may have 30 technologies under the hood. So there's an umbrella term, there's a lot of approaches, tools, many of which have been around for a long time. But I'm reminded of one of the observations about transformational innovation, it doesn't always involve a new technology. It can involve, and to great effect actually, a new expression of an old technology. And you take the integrated circuit, and we had computing, and then we had binary arithmetic, and we had all that stuff, but suddenly we could do it at a scale and a cost point that was transformational. And so, now let's take AI and apply it to healthcare. Is that where we are? Are we at an inflection point where there is the potential to bring these well-established tools into the complexity of healthcare and do it at a scale that's going to lead to real impact? Tell us how does AI fit into healthcare? Scott, go ahead, Scott.
Okay, tough question. Robbie, your comments, I really enjoyed those. It reminds me of something that Marvin Minsky, who's regarded by, I think, sort of one of the four grandfathers of this perhaps non-existent thing called artificial intelligence. And he said, someone asked us, so what is artificial intelligence? Artificial intelligence is anything we don't understand how to do. So it's this, whatever's just beyond the horizon of what we know, that's artificial intelligence in terms of this fuzzy name thing. In terms of what can happen, what will happen when these sets of technologies collide with healthcare, I want to start with a reference point, which I think is interesting. There's a study that just came out a few weeks ago from the McKinsey Global Institute, and they looked at the potential for automation across, I think, 12 or 15 different industries, and over 2,000 tasks. And what was fascinating to me was that they looked at the task level. In other words, what number of these tasks can be automated? And what they came up with is that they said 51% of the total 2,000 tasks, again, across the industries, top to bottom, that they looked at, are subject to automation. And within healthcare, their judgment was that 36% of the tasks and the activities within healthcare can be automated. So those are big numbers. And I won't try to speak for the kind of credibility of the report and so forth, other than there was apparently a fairly rigorous methodology looked at, and even if you argue that those numbers are plus or minus a little bit, those are still huge numbers with huge economics behind it. And they weren't looking out into a 2050 kind of a future. They're looking at today when these things can actually be done. I think in terms of trying to figure out, sort of applying perhaps that mindset of all these different tasks to the medical environment, healthcare, what can possibly happen? If you look across the ecosystem, everywhere from starting with the patient to the clinician, the provider, back to the researcher, out to the payers, out to regulatory environments. So this very complex ecosystem, which at least I've heard certain professors almost question whether you could even call it a system. So I've heard. So, and I think from our experience kind of bumping into this industry, that's a fair point. So you've got this complexity, but you've got these different roles and these different players. So what can happen if a provider has best medical thinking applied to that individual patient in a matter of seconds? That's what our mission is. That's what we're actually working on doing, because we model knowledge directly to execute it against a particular fact pattern. In this case, that's a patient profile. In the case of the patient, what if the patient is able to answer a set of very intelligent questions before they go in to see the doctor, so that they're not only educated on what's going on with them, but the doctor has an ability to start far in advance from where they are. From the payer's side, what if economics are actually attached to clinical treatments, therapies, and outcomes, so that you don't have these, again, this fragmentation of information across the board? And that's very much at the core of how we think of AI in terms of what can actually be modeled directly. And then on the research side, what's possible if you create basically a platform for doing research that allows you to share information with other researchers that has executable knowledge. And this is sort of a new concept, but that's, again, the realm where we play in, at least. And someone had a great vision, a great model that they threw out. What if you looked at research papers as having APIs? An API is an application programming interface. So it's basically how you connect in and out of a software program. What if you started to conceive of research papers as having APIs? What would the impact on the ecosystem of being able to have that information shared, transmitted, and worked on basically through different means of adding smarts or intelligence to the system. So I'll stop there.
I like this. This is cool. It's a whole second career. I can go back and add APIs to all my papers. This is that's a fascinating concept, though.
Concept is.
I like that. Robbie, what do you think?
So I'm going to sort of do a little launch off again, telling the story of how the trends of kind of looking at healthcare as really no different than any of the other industries where I'm going to call it AI because we're here to talk about AI, but you know, I think of it more as technology-aided decision making and intelligence. If you look at what happened with all of those guys sitting probably in a basement somewhere at North American Van Lines, what happened was these guys had a bunch of data they were looking at, and a bunch of researchers came in and studied how they think. They studied how they did their job. And they then went on and they started building all these mathematical models to basically reflect how these guys thought. And those models could obviously run much faster than those guys could because they were run by computers. So now let's flip to healthcare, which clearly has taken much longer. I mean, we're talking, that was the 70s and 80s, and we're in 2010, and this is just starting to happen. If you go back, and forgive me for being a little bit reflective here, and you look at, I don't know, we were just in Belize, so I'm a little bit kind of keen on the whole Mayan culture. You look at a Mayan doctor in a village, okay? A Mayan doctor in a village, how's he practicing medicine? He has patients who come in, okay, with his hands, whatever, and plants, right? He has patients come in. He probably has a bunch of plants that he got out, I mean, at the beginning, he got out in the forest, and he doesn't know what they do. But he starts to try them. And what does he do? He tries them, and he writes down a data point. He gathers data, right? Okay, and then he does it again and again and again. And he probably gets tens or hundreds of instances that eventually enable him to begin being smart, more smart, about what thing he gives to what person, because he now has some pattern matching that he can do against these people he's seen. Now, there's a few things that are unique about this Mayan healer. First of all, he's seeing tens, if not maybe hundreds of cases. And the other thing that's interesting is all of the information that he gets, all that data he gathers, where does it go? Well, it stays right there with him. I mean, he doesn't even have a way to really necessarily communicate it to the person in the village next to him. I mean, there's no communication framework there, and whenever this all happened. I know this is all kind of theoretical, but the point I'm making is that what we are doing for that experience today with AI in healthcare is exactly what those professors were doing with respect to the transportation industry. So now we have the ability, we're basically attempting to model the way that healer's brain worked, or the way any given doctor's brain worked. But now, instead of having tens or hundreds of cases that we can look at and inform ourselves with, we have billions. We have billions of data points, okay? And now, the data, instead of it sitting in a village, the data, the world is flat. I mean, the data moves instantaneously around the world, and anyone who begins to build those models can access all this data as a way to inform the decisions they're making. But we are doing the same thing. AI is attempting to ultimately model the way that healer and any doctor makes decisions. And it's not just any doctor. It's any plan administrator, it's an insurance company, it's a self-insured employer, It's it's the medical professional who answers the phone when you call up and say something's wrong. I mean, what we're trying to do is model their behavior with a much broader set of data and much faster, because we can use computer technology to do it, in order to make the process more efficient. The bottom line is we believe that by virtue of allowing computers to begin thinking and processing this information the same way that my doctor did, we can very dramatically lower the cost. We can make care come faster. We can deliver it across geographic lines. So there's no reason why we can't take care, why intelligence that's developed in the United States can't take care of a bunch of patients who are in Africa. Like, there's no reason why that can't happen. It's all portable, it all moves. And so the way I look at it is AI in healthcare is exactly that. We are modeling the way doctors think and the way professionals think and the way insurance companies think in order to enable them to get more efficient.
Okay, but I'm stumbling over the seeming misalignment of two parts of your comment. I understand the last part, but I'm reminded of the first part, which is healthcare is arguably the biggest industry in the American economy. Pretty close. And inarguably the least impacted by IT. It's at least 30.
Wild, isn't it?
I mean, they barely know how to spell cost, let alone efficiency. And the practitioners will, the whole system has been set up to focus on revenue first and foremost. Anyway, there's a whole lot to it. But, so that raises the question of how is adoption of AI, either broadly or even narrowly, going to proceed in healthcare? What gives you optimism that this industry is ready?
Well, do you want me to take that answer?
Yeah, you seeded it with
Okay,
your
okay.
comments, so yeah.
Healthcare is different. Healthcare is different than routing trucks across the country or training a computer to assemble a car or any other applications that have happened so quickly in the AI space. Healthcare is different. Why is healthcare different? I'm gonna go out of the standard answer. The standard answer that you get, and I know it's what most people believe, and I'm not trying to be argumentative. I'm just presenting a different view for the sake of us having an interesting conversation. I personally do not believe that the slowness of AI adoption in healthcare has anything to do with the ecosystem. And I believe it from the deepest part of my heart. We've spent a lot of time having very confidential conversations with hundreds and hundreds of people in the healthcare industry. Have a look at our medical advisory board. It's not a masthead of names that we knew, and so we put them up on a list. These are people, the vast majority of them, 80% of them, we recruited cold. In other words, we didn't know them at all. I didn't know them. My co-founders didn't know them before we called them and told them about what we were doing. And these are some of the greatest leaders in healthcare. Regina Benjamin, the former Surgeon General of the United States, the head of the Duke Medical School, the former attending physician to Congress, Robert Krasner. And I have yet to meet any leader, like real substantial leader in healthcare, and I'm including leaders at the payers, at the insurance companies, we call them payers. I'm including individual doctors. There's one segment of the ecosystem that we get a little bit of pushback against. But in general, I have yet to run into a situation with those other groups I described where they don't look at what we're trying to do and say, oh my God, this is exactly what we need. Tell me when it's ready. because we want to deploy this. So I don't think it's the ecosystem. I don't think it's the drivers of the ecosystem. I don't buy that, personally. I think it's because of the stakes. The stakes are high. They're high. We are dealing with people's lives. We're dealing with their health. We're dealing with the lives of their loved ones in many cases, because often, there are people who are looking at care options for the person sitting next to them, not for themselves. The pressure is even higher. The stakes are high, and therefore, and I won't say that perfection is, we'll never get to perfection, but the bar we have to achieve around quality in order for us, I'd say even the people who are building the technology, to feel comfortable to deploy it commercially is higher than it's ever been with any other technology adoption. Hey, you could argue it has to be perfect. I don't think it has to be perfect, but it's very interesting. In the tech business at Microsoft, we always used to talk about, there was this line we used to say, it has to work 100%, 80% of the time. That was the line, okay, or 70%, whatever. It's got to work really, really well, but it's okay to say in these 20 cases it doesn't work, okay? When it comes to healthcare, when people are evaluating healthcare solutions, they want it to work 100% of the time. That has never been achieved in the technology industry, ever. I would urge any of you to point to a technology solution that works 100% of the time. It never happens. It's not possible. It's just not. Civil aviation. Sorry, you're talking about flying airplanes across the country, and yet we still have people sitting up in the command towers, and we still have pilots sitting in airplanes because there are cases when the technology won't do it. There are. Okay, they're trained for the failure cases. And we spend so much time talking about automation and removing the doctor, which, by the way, I'm not a fan of. And I don't think that's the answer. The bottom line is, I believe, as crazy as it might sound, I know that I'm running against a lot of kind of popular perspective on this. I actually think the ecosystem is quite healthy. I believe that. The payers have a role to play. The insurers, primarily corporate America, they're primarily the insurers. The insurers have a role to play. They're paying the bills. Okay? The patients clearly have a role to play. The doctors and all of the medical professionals that surround them, they have roles to play. And technology can help them. Technology can help them be more efficient. Technology can help them deliver higher quality care. Technology can help them do so much, and I'm not even talking in our field, in the field that 98.6 is focused on, just in general. So I think it is the demand for, and I believe the entrepreneurs actually believe that it's got to get pretty close, and that is the stumbling block, in my mind. Okay,
that's an interesting premise. Okay, that it's the ecosystem is more ready than we acknowledge, and that the performance bar is just super high, and that's the biggest obstacle. You're right, that's not a universally accepted diagnosis of adoption. Scott, how do you guys see adoption? And maybe add to it, that one of the things we've talked about in these gatherings is the fact that the financial incentive system in American healthcare has had a very powerful effect, and then now a number of players are actively trying to re-engineer the financial incentives, and so the magic word these days is value. What do you think about AI adoption? Do you think AI can accelerate its adoption by plugging into the demand for value? How do you see it?
Let me answer that in just a moment. Let me start by springboarding off of some of your comments, Robbie, in terms of where the bar is set and what performance looks like. I agree. I would restate it another way in the sense that if you show up with something that really is sort of obviously and arguably better, you start using it. I think that the history of technology adoption looks like this. The most recent example that we've all experienced, probably virtually everyone in this room, is a smartphone. When Steve Jobs came out with that, by the way, his birthday is tomorrow, X number of years ago, it was a very different kind of device, a very different kind of computing device, and it worked very differently because it was always with you. And people adopted it, and it changed everything. All of a sudden, there's this world of apps. All of a sudden, there's this ecosystem coming from it, and no one had to sell anyone on it. It was because it worked. It worked really well, and it was a true platform. People added to it, and they used it even more. It got smarter and smarter and smarter, more and more connected. So the question is, does AI, this broad term, have something that can tee up into this arena? Our answer, and I'll go back as a quick reference to what I was referencing at the very beginning of AI. Robbie, what you're talking about with the data and so forth, seeing the patterns in that, recognizing that, bringing that forward, that's one of the two flavors that kind of originated out of the Dartmouth conference back in 1956, where this all started in one sense, which is this school of probabilities and predictions, which is data-based. In other words, it's based on massive amounts of data that were gathered, just as you were saying. And that gives you a kind of form of mathematical computation that is often expressed in terms of probabilities. So, for example, it might come back with a probability that says there's a 92% chance you have this particular type of cancer, and so on and so forth. It might be able to kind of reason through all these other kinds of things. And so it produces, and this is in essence, a black box just because it's mathematical reasoning that speaks a different language than us humans do. It's not saying it's good or bad. It can be extraordinarily good, particularly at population levels. Where we play and where this other kind of style of box is, as it were, we play in the clear box world. So all of our thinking, which is nothing other than the synthesis, the collective best thinking of physicians, doctors, and providers that we work with to build these knowledge models, is explicit. It's laid out. It answers questions explicitly, like, why did you come to this conclusion? And then you can drill down further. Where does that come from? What is the research based on? And you can see explicitly why it's applied to an individual patient. In other words, that particular fact pattern. So it's a complete set of thinking. You can agree or disagree with it, but it's explicit, and it is all connected. We think that this kind of clear box approach can make a real difference in terms of adoption, and I'm delighted to hear the reactions you guys are getting to your system. We're getting the same in terms of ours. They're saying, please build this faster. We want to use it. The most kind of surprising and exciting feedback we had on that was one of the world's leading Parkinson's researchers based out of the UK, and we weren't ready for that. We were surprised that a researcher wanted to use our system. We had not conceived of those kind of applications. And that, I think, also speaks to the deeply collaborative nature of when you get it right. Collaborations will naturally evolve and take you places where you hadn't originally expected to go. On the value question, I have to respectfully disagree with part of what you've said, Robbie, in terms of I don't think our system works well. And I think the fact that there are incentives for revenue in many cases that are not tied to outcomes is a fundamental problem. The data is there. In some cases, not in all. Often it's held by payers and not actually by the providers, crazily enough. So there's this rationalization process that needs to take place, and I think that if clinical actions can have an economic lens that is just built into what those clinical actions are, that satisfying everyone concerned with the economics in the ecosystem, that can go a long way to making the system work better and causing people to think in terms of outcomes and cost, and therefore in terms of value. Because as you said, Lee, the system has not been incentivized in that way, therefore the system has not organized itself in that way. The metrics they have don't capture this kind of data, but it's one of my hopes with certainly in the big data form of AI that you're talking about, Robbie, and is the big part of what's going on out there. It is data intensive. It's a big focus on getting more and more data and doing more and more better analysis on that, and of course recognizing new and deeper patterns. I think that's all to the good in terms of a shift toward a value-based approach as opposed to fee for service, where basically the cash register rings every time a procedure is done. You don't know necessarily what's happening on the other end in terms of outcomes.
Okay, we need to switch to Q&A here in a second, but I have one last. You guys are doing such a great job at not only dealing with AI, but the intersection and the adoption questions. Let me ask you to prognosticate a little bit. We won't hold you to it, but AI and then all of its tools, it seems like it has the potential to be really powerful in healthcare in a whole variety of ways. Well, technology changes like that could come could march into healthcare in two ways. They could come alongside the existing providers and facilitate diagnosis, therapy, patient management, coordination, workflow. I mean, there's all kinds of operational and decision elements of healthcare that you can imagine AI contributing to. But it could also be sufficiently disruptive so as to enable entirely new modes of practice. From a business point of view, it could segment markets, And there are people out there trying to segment healthcare either horizontally or vertically and doing all kinds of things. So, do you think we're going to see AI's biggest impact in the near term by partnering with providers or by disrupting the business models?
Go ahead.
So again, I'm going to kind of be a little controversial. You're noticing a theme. I'm not a big believer in disruption. I think disruption implies that there are winners and there are losers. And I do not believe that that's the way it needs to happen, should happen, or will happen in the healthcare space. If you look at the major elements of the ecosystem, and I 100% agree with Scott that while I think the ecosystem is strong and will be retained. When I say ecosystem, the different players and their relationships to each other. I totally agree with Scott that the ecosystem is not working as well as it needs to work, clearly. I mean, healthcare in the United States is completely messed up. I do not believe that it is because the ecosystem needs to be disrupted. In other words, that one of these players in the ecosystem needs to be a loser while other members of the ecosystem or new additions into the ecosystem, like technologists, investors in technology companies, or patients, or whatever, are the winners. I don't believe it. So, and I'm going to mention kind of three core things about that. First of all, I think that all of these, I mentioned this already, I think all of the players in the ecosystem have an important role to play. Clearly, the patient has a critical role to play. The providers have an absolutely essential role to play. I don't think anyone debates that. The payers are actually driving down cost. They're trying. They really try. They have ginormous teams of people who are trying hard to lower costs. They're like, I mean, if you look at what's really going on between the payers, these are the people, I mean, a lot of us refer to them as insurance companies, but they're primarily just paying the bill because the self-insured employer company is actually providing the insurance. But what their job is to go to the provider and say, wait, why does that cost you that much money? It should really cost you this much money. Or you're doing too many of these things. Why are you doing that? Or why are you prescribing this medication when you could be prescribing this? This all sounds like goodness, doesn't it? Okay, they are actually working to try to lower the cost. On the flip side, the providers are trying to deliver their services at a lower cost because the insurance companies, the payers, are putting pressure on them to deliver their services at a lower cost. These are interesting dynamics. You'd think that this is good. Okay, those checks and balances are good. Now, it's not working, okay? But the role of these different players, I think, continues to make sense. You need the providers, you need the payer who is going to attempt to keep everyone honest and ensure that prices are driving down. And of course, you need the insurer. You know, for individuals who don't work at companies, it's an insurance company. But for the vast majority of people who are, you know, who are working for companies who are self-insured, it's actually the company. So number one is, I think every single one of the members of this ecosystem has a role to play. This isn't like Uber, where you look at it and you say there is no role for the taxi driver. Like, the taxi driver just doesn't have to exist. It's this element of the ecosystem that is highly inefficient. It should just go away. Okay, I don't see it that way. So I don't see this as a disruption. So that's number one. Number two, I believe that AI will help, can help every single element of this ecosystem. Every one of those groups that I just described will be assisted by AI. There's no question about it. AI is already helping the payers with the way they analyze claims. Okay? It's already happening. Providers are starting to use AI to try to make their practices more efficient. Now, we could sit here and argue whether it's lipstick on the pig or not, but that's detail. Okay? At the end of the day, AI has a role to play in every single one of these constituencies. So that's number two. And number three, generally speaking, and again, this is an interpretation, to me, the concept of disruption means revolution. It implies revolution. I mean, basically, Uber is always the greatest example. It happens to be one of the most impactful changes that's happened right in front of our eyes. It was a revolution. I mean, like, we went from here to here overnight, bang, and all of a sudden, like, the taxi drivers don't know what to do with their medallions. It was a revolution, hardly evolutionary. I happen to believe that the changes that will happen in healthcare need to be evolutionary by virtue of the stakes that we're dealing with and the complexity of the ecosystem. It's broken. Totally agree with Scott. But you're not going to execute a revolution in the medical industry in the United States. It's just, I think that's an unrealistic objective. You must approach it evolutionary, which you could argue means it's going to take a little bit longer. It's going to take slightly more, sort of reflective minds to figure out where to tie it in first and how to tie it in first and where the low-hanging fruit is. It's going to be harder. But I think evolution is the right answer. I do not think that disruption needs to happen, and I don't think it should happen.
Scott, what do you think? Evolution or meteorites?
No, first of all, I'll second everything you said. I think you're spot on there, Robbie. A couple different things come to my mind. One is the question of time horizon. I think Bill Gates, and maybe slightly off with the years here, said something like, we overestimate what we can do in 2 years, but we underestimate what we can do in 10 years. I think that's absolutely true for the collision of AI into the healthcare system. I think, expectation at a 1 or 2 year level are, in terms of a system level, ecosystem level, are just, not there. I was involved in, as I said, in the music industry getting onto the internet at its very beginnings. And I saw a gazillion different business models, and none of them made sense. Even though a lot of venture capital was pouring in. And it turns out none of them did make sense. It wasn't right. However, there is an opportunity to create, I think, substantial value from AI, as you say, and I absolutely agree with that. I think it will be a coevolution, and I think it will pick up steam as it goes forward. Buckminster Fuller, it's always a question about, how hard is it to change something? And I agree with you, this term disruption is an overused Silicon Valley buzzword. That's thought to be an end in itself. But Buckminster Fuller said, if you're trying to change someone's thinking, forget about it. That's just really, really hard to do. But if you can give them a new tool, through which the use of causes them to change their thinking, there you've got something, because that really does change something fundamental, and it sustains over time. And I think that's how this evolution is going to take place. I think these new forms of intelligence are going to start to enter in different ways. Your company's one example, ours is another. It's going to be fascinating to see how they kind of incrementally, but that doesn't mean in terms of the scope of the impact. I think it's going to be huge impacts in a lot of areas, but to reorchestrate the entire ecosystem, I agree with you, Robbie, the fundamental roles that the different players are playing, I don't see that as changing fundamentally. But I think there's really going to be a new way that is all orchestrated and related. And again, I think a lot of it will be driven by these different flavors of AI as they start to take hold out there. And a big shift will be, as you questioned earlier, Lee, about the shift to value orientation, where the costs and the outcomes will be connected. The insight into why this particular diagnosis was reached will be very clear, will be laid out explicitly. There'll be tons of data behind it at the population level. We'll have some logic at the individual patient level. And this will start to spread, and I absolutely agree with the other comment, Robbie, that this will be a global impact. And I've certainly heard several comments out of leaders in the global health space that the old idea, the old conception that there is sort of, first country health systems and then developing country health systems is going to start to blur and hopefully rapidly start to fade away. It will take some time, just with the dispersal of knowledge of how, smart, how much intelligence is going to be delivered onto your smartphone. And smartphones, cell towers were a huge leap forward over landline-based systems, and I think the same kind of thing can actually take place in the healthcare system in terms of these additions of intelligence.
Thank you, gentlemen. Okay, enough of my softball questions. How about you all? Oh, there's a couple of questions. Man in the gray shirt right there.
Oh, wait.
Oh, yeah. Please wait for the microphone because we're video capturing this whole event.
Gotcha. I'm Ross Lord. I'm a PhD candidate at UW Medicine. And I guess I'm going to bring up a counterexample about the readiness for adoption for AI in healthcare. So Johnson & Johnson had an anesthesia machine called Sedasis, where they could automatically do the anesthesia for procedures. And it was never, it failed to achieve adoption. And it was actually championed against by the American Anesthesia Association because they fundamentally didn't trust it. And I also think probably because physicians are trained to be the locus of control and domain experts when it comes to healthcare. And so I'm curious how you are allaying those fears with your companies and your products.
So Johnson & Johnson is a phenomenal company. And besides shareholder equity, the other thing that they hold very dear to their hearts are patient safety. However, the reason why we have doctors is because doctors don't have shareholder equity. All they care about, the only thing they care about, is patient safety. So I think this comes down to the point that I made before. Like, why was that not adopted? It was not adopted because I think there maybe far be it for, I mean, these are brilliant people at Johnson & Johnson. Their product strategy might have been a little bit flawed. They tried to fully automate something that can't be fully automatable because the automation, computers will never be perfect in stochastic cases. When there are probabilities in play, it is impossible to be right 100% of the time. It's just not possible. Even if you're right, like a doctor's perspective is, even if you tell me I'm going to be right 99.9% of the time, that's not good enough. It's just not. I need to be 100% confident. Now, that doesn't mean I'm going to be 100% confident that the treatment I'm going to give someone is going to work. That's not the point. But the point is, by virtue of the way the medical system works, they're going to give that medication, and if they have a low probability, like if the probability is less than 95%, they're going to make sure, and it's something serious, they're going to make sure that patient's back in the office the next day so they can check, because they need to be 100%. They're playing with people's lives. And so I think that the moment you put forward a solution that is attempting, that needs to be basically marketed as being 100% correct, a very, very high percentage of the time, like 100% of the time, you're going to run into pushback because doctors say that's unacceptable. That's what I think it comes down to. I don't think it's that they don't, if someone came to the anesthesiologists and said, we have a solution that is 100% correct 100% of the time, do you think they would push back?
Yes.
I'm not so sure.
Try checklists. Why don't they do them? They hate checklists, and everyone knows it drastically drops infection rates. Costs nothing, never fails. They won't do them.
So you're going to have to tell me a little bit more about checklists.
Atul Gawande wrote a wonderful book called The Checklist Manifesto.
Yeah.
And basically, he's demonstrated that if you give people a very clear checklisting process in surgical suites between the nurse and the physician, and that how it's set up, it costs nothing. It drastically reduces post-operative infection, post-operative problems, and physicians, by and large, despise it because it beats on their authority as in charge. So they resist it over and over. It costs nothing, it has perfect outcomes, and it's resisted.
So unfortunately, I can't comment on it because I haven't read the research and I haven't talked to any doctors who are resisting it. What I can tell you is that I'm sold, you could say I've drank the Kool-Aid, okay? I'm sold that doctors care deeply about patient health and patient safety. And that at their core, this is what drives them. That's what I believe. I believe that insurance companies are driven, by and large, by lowering the cost of healthcare. I know that on the side of those of us who have to pay insurance companies, and I'm one of them, we see, quality of care staying the same or going down, and we see prices going up. But that does not mean to say that insurance companies don't spend a silly amount of time trying to drive down the cost of healthcare. They try. It's very, very difficult.
Scott, what's your answer to this question about, it's basically an adoption question,
It
right?
is.
The intersection of the new technology with the professional prerogatives and responsibilities of the providers.
Right. So two things on that one. Actually, three, because I'll tie into Atul Gawande's book, The Checklist Manifesto, which I think is terrific. So for what we provide, again, I mentioned this notion of a clear box. So it literally is a clear box. You see the thinking. I mean, it's structured. It's structured more rigorously than I think you probably see thinking anywhere else. And that's built into the system. So we don't have to say you can trust the system. They see that you can. And you can run another patient through it and see what the analysis comes out and see what the thinking is. So we're not trying to convince them of something that's invisible. Again, it's all explicit and it's absolutely visible. Your comment on the question about the Atul Gawande checklist question is an interesting one to me. And I think it has to do with the evolution, a little bit of prognostication here, where it'll go. Picture an iPad in the operating room, whereas part of the procedure, part of getting paid, is you tap. It doesn't take a lot of time, but you tap that you go through every one of those checklist procedures. Also, other things are going to be brought up because there's going to be a lot more intelligence brought to bear into the operating room as well as other environments. And I can conceive where payers are going to say, this all has to be done, in essence, according to Hoyle, or you're not going to get paid on the other side. That already exists, and it's not, as an example, for in the realm of cardiology with heart teams. For certain use of certain devices, you have to convene a heart team, have to follow certain protocols, so that the health of the patient, to the best possible input from all these different players, participants from all the different disciplines, is factored into the decision about whether or not to do an intervention, whether to use this type of a device or that type of device. So I think this collaboration, which we're starting to see, is going to be augmented and encouraged throughout the system. And I think that the resistance to some of these things is in many ways going to be overcome by the fact these things are just going to work really well. And that's what we're in the business of having to do. If this stuff doesn't work well and it's intuitive and it's frictionless, it's not going to be adopted.
Well, I would encourage you all to continually pay attention to the human dimensions of adoption. It's a really big deal. But there are some interesting experiments. One local here, run by David Flum at the university, is called the SCOPE project, which is an attempt to get all the surgeons in the state of Washington to come together and agree on what they're going to work on together to improve the outcomes from surgery. And that SCOPE project has been phenomenally successful at getting them to agree on checklists, pre-surgical nutrition, other experiments. So there is another dimension in adoption, which is collegial and professional expectations and assistance. And so this is a very, very human enterprise, as you know, healthcare, with all of us wild participants. So, next question, Ed.
We have a question from our online chat function.
Oh, great.
Okay. What are some of the boldest examples of using AI in healthcare in the country so far?
I missed one of the words.
Oh, I'm sorry.
What are the-
I'll give that to you again. What are some of the boldest examples of using AI in healthcare in the country so far?
Yes, someone mentioned automated EKG interpretations. That's certainly one. There's a lot of work that's being done, and this is one of the Watson areas. I know that their partnership with Sloan Kettering produced an oncology advisor system. And from what I've read, and I'm not deeply schooled in this speaks to the breadth of the AI world, that machines are, in fact, better than humans in recognizing what's going on with the visual image. And I think that's a real area of success. And in my small mind, I can conceive of kind of how that could evolve and get better and better and better as well over time as more and more training takes place. So I think that's a couple of immediate things that come to mind. And certainly examples, if you have seen Eric Topol's book, which is, I would highly recommend it, The Patient Will See You Now, sort of about inverting a lot of these things. He talks about a lot of different intelligences going into smartphones, the ability to get knowledge and, in that case, a portable EKG running off of your smartphone that otherwise wouldn't exist. And that produces different outcomes, often on airplanes, as an example, whether or not you have to land the plane.
So I don't know if it's going to be a bold thing, because kind of bold makes it sound like it's like truly cutting edge. I think there's a bunch of places in healthcare where AI is being very successfully used. And the imaging example is likely the best one. It's being used very broadly. I mean, mammograms are being initially reviewed by computer systems. And it happens instantaneously, and when the image comes up in front of the radiologist, there's little red boxes that are being, drawn around the areas of the image that the doctor needs to apply special attention to. I mean, that's an application of AI, and there's no question that this technology it's certainly dramatically increasing the efficiency of these radiologists, because there's a lot of these mammograms happening. And number two, and I haven't seen research on this, but I'm going to just go out on a limb and say I'm going to bet that in time that AI will help those physicians see things that they might not have otherwise seen, and therefore save lives. So the whole realm of clinical decision support, which I view as a very evolutionary approach, but still an important application of AI, where it's not about replacing the doctor, it's not about full and complete automation. It's about enabling deep analysis to help doctors be more efficient and therefore deliver higher qualities of care at the same or a lesser price.
You know what? it's getting really late. And I hate to do this because you're an interested audience with a lot of great questions. But I think what I need to do is to bring this part of the session to a close. So I'm not standing between you and the wine. But I want to invite you to stand between these guys and the wine. So come corner them, pepper them with your questions. And if you have ideas about subtopics in this general realm of AI in healthcare or case studies that you think might make good fodder, this is such a big topic and potentially so important to not only healthcare, but to what the innovation ecosystem in Seattle can contribute to the future of healthcare, because we have so many relevant strengths. If you have suggestions, let Nicole or me know, and we'd be glad to accumulate those. Thank you for your interest. Let me ask you now to help thank these gentlemen.